Hello friends, my name is Venkatesh. In this video, we'll be talking about India's weakening growth trajectory. What are the factors that are responsible for the India's weakening growth and how we can revive India's economic growth, and what is the most important variable that we can hold responsible for the India's weakening growth trajectory. So all these questions will be answered in this video. This article is being covered from the Indian Express explained page. This article is very important from the perspective of mains as well as the prelims. You will get to know many important concepts from this video, so please watch the video till the end. You will get familiar with the concept called the PFCE, private financial consumption expenditure. This factor is the most important factor that is determining the growth rate of the Indian economy. So let us begin. The author of this article asks a simple question to us. Is India's growth rate being held back due to the weak consumer demand, or are there any supply side factors? So to know this, what we can do is that we can do sector specific studies. But if we are going to do the sector specific studies, choosing individual sectors and industries, what will it lead to? It might lead to the contradictory findings because some sectors in the Indian economy are growing faster, but there are some sectors which have not shown any improvement or revival in the growth. So this might give us a contradictory finding. So what the author is suggesting is that a more robust way would be to look at the data for GDP, which the monetary measures of the country's total output. So he is advising to look at the GDP data. In the GDP data, specifically the GDP data calculated by the expenditure method. So we know there are three methods of GDP calculation. One of them is the expenditure method. Okay, now the key variable to track within the GDP. So within GDP there is a key variable. It is called as the private final consumption expenditure. So this is private final consumption expenditure. So it is a variable within the GDP that we have to look for knowing the growth rate, impact on the growth rate. Okay, now look at how this variable has grown over the years should give us a decent understanding of whether the India suffers from weak consumer demand. So our primary question and the premise of this article was that whether there are supply side factors that are impacting the India's economic growth, or there are some demand side factors or the consumer demand that is impacting the India's economic growth. Now he further explains here the concept of the PFCE. So private final consumption expenditure. Please remember this. This is a very important concept that might be directly asked in prelims. Now, the GDP is calculated by capturing the expenditure of different components of the economy. It adds up the expenditure by private individuals. Now, the GDP, what it includes is that it includes the expenditure by the private individuals. It is called as the PFCE, and it also includes the expenditure of the companies that have invested their capital, okay, to increase the production. It is the expenditure done by the companies is called as the gross fixed capital formation, and all the spending by the government. So third component is the spending of the government financial consumption expenditure. So we have three components here. One is the PFCE, second is the gross fixed capital formation, and third is the all the government expenses that has been done by the government. So if we combine all these three factors, we will get, in the end, what we will get is that we will get the GDP of the country. Now in India, the PFCE accounts for the 55 to 66% of all national GDP in a year. So this first factor, we have three components in our GDP while we calculate when we are calculating the GDP from the expenditure method. The first component is the private financial consumption expenditure. The second component, as we have looked at, is the expenditure made by the companies, that is called as gross fixed capital formation. And the third component is the government expenditure. But friends, this is a very important fact that you should be keeping in mind, that the PFCE, the first component, private final consumption expenditure, accounts for 55 to 56% of all national GDP in a year. This is a very important statement, that the private financial consumption expenditure contributes 55 to 66%, 56% of the GDP. So if we have to revive the GDP, we cannot overlook this factor, the uh, private final consumption expenditure. Okay. Now in India, the PFC accounts for 55 to 56% of all national GDP in a year, and is quite obviously the biggest driver of economic growth. So if you are asked in an MCQ that private final consumption expenditure is the biggest driver of the economic growth, so that would be a true statement, because it is contributing 55 to 56% to the India GDP. Apart from this direct influence, it also indirectly influences the next biggest driver of the GDP, and that is gross fixed capital formation. Now we have second component, that is gross fixed capital formation. This gross fixed capital formation is nothing but the expenditure made by the industries to increase the production. So when will industries invest? When will industries try to increase the production? If the consumer demand increases, at that time industries will like to invest, and they will like to increase the production. But without the demand and without the the consumption from the consumption, increase the consumption, they would not like to invest in any new technologies, or they will not try to increase the production. So this is so private final consumption expenditure is impacting the gross fixed capital formation. So this has the both these factors are interlinked, and this PFCE, private final consumption expenditure, is impacting the GF's gross fiscal capital formation. So this is very important factor. Now this is a measure of the money spent by businesses when they make investment, and it accounts for 33% of all the GDP. So this GFCF, that is gross fixed capital formation, is contributing 33% to the GDP, and the private financial consumption expenditure is contributing 55% of the GDP. So these are the two facts that we have to keep in mind. Now it is crucial to understand the economic logic that links these two biggest driver of economic growth, which together account for 88 to 89%. So if we combine both these factors, 55 plus 33%, it accounts for 80 to 89% of all the GDP in India. So these are the two most important variables that are impacting the growth rate of the country. Now if consumer demand slows down, it robs businesses of any incentive to boost productive capacities by making fresh investments. Now if the consumer demand has reduced, the businesses will not like to invest in the economy, and they will not try to increase their production capacities. Now just boosting the investment in the businesses without for the demand will not make sense, because we also have to look at the consumption side. If we are overlooking the consumption side, the demand side, what will it lead to? It will not lead to the increased consumption, but it will impact these industries. They are investing so much capital and they have no demand. So this will lead to NPH, okay, non-performing assets. Now the weighty role of the private consumer demand in boosting GDP makes it the important actor determining India's economic fortunes. Now we have concluded here that we have reached to the point where we know that the private final consumption expenditure is the most important variable determining India's growth trajectory. So here is the graph. It is given here that in the financial year 17 to 22, so this is the projected rate, private financial consumption expenditure, 3.7. Now if you look at the financial year 2005 to financial year 11, it is 8.2, and it is consistently declining. So here he has given this graph. Now does India have a supply problem? That is another important question. A good measure of whether India has adequate supply capacity or not is the rate of capacity utilization data from repeated RBI's OBICUS, order books, inventories and capacity utilization survey. So this is important survey, OBICUS. So you should be knowing who conducts the OBICUS. It can be directly asked in an MCQ that OBICUS is related with which of the following organization. Now this OBICUS survey show how capacity utilization has struggled to breach the 75% mark. So this OBICUS survey clearly shows that firms have been working far below their full capacity for several years. This is a very important finding, guys. Now firms have not been utilizing or have not been performing to their fullest capacity. They are performing far below their full capacity. So this is an important factor. This is an important finding that supplies, we do not have problem at the supply side. We do not have problem at the supply side. We have problem at the demand side. So the factors, the variable that I told you, private financial consumption expenditure and the gross fiscal capital formation. These are the two important variables that determine India's economic growth, and you should be keeping in the mind also the OBICUS survey, which is clearly stating that we do not have the demand side problem, but we have the we do not have the supply side problem, but we have the demand side issues. So we need to increase the consumption, private consumption, so as to increase the economic growth. So that was all the article is about. Thank you for watching till the end.